Hey everyone, Jason from Leviton Audio back again. Today we have the second installment of a series I like to call Parts, where I go out and I find interesting parts, components, widgets, gadgets, whatever to help you on your workbench or in your rigs. I have 3 such components on the bench today, so let's go ahead and dig in. First up, we have the Hanna HT1556 soldering heat sink clip tool. So what is a heat sink or a heat clip? If you read the back, it tells you it absorbs and dissipates heat during soldering or desoldering sensitive components. So just like it says, it provides an additional bit of mass for you to draw heat away from whatever you're soldering on. So why would you use something like this? Well, if you do stuff like this all day long, you probably never really have a need for something like this. A large 1/4 inch jack like this, it's quite a bit of metal. There's a lot of mass in here. There's a lot of place for heat to flow while the soldering operation is going on. And generally it takes a couple seconds and it's very difficult to damage something like this. However, if you get something a little bit smaller, like this is inside of an XLR jack, the pieces of metal, the conductors that you're going to solder onto are quite a bit smaller. And I guarantee if you hold a soldering iron to one of these long enough, you will actually push one of these pins all the way through it and, at least for me, destroy the integrity of this connector forever. And that would go in the trash if that ever happened. You also have a situation where you have something that's even quite a bit smaller than that, which is this, which is just a 2.1 millimeter DC connector. But for me on this, and this is one of the reasons why I went shopping for a heat sink, is you don't so much damage the part with this, but the cable that comes in, if the cable starts to absorb too much heat. I find that most of these power cables, the overall conductor on here, there's always something on the insulation on cables that's called shrink back. And that's basically when it gets hot is how much it's going to basically shrink back or how much it's going to compress and start to melt away. Most good audio cables don't really have a lot of shrink back, but I find most of these really generic kind of power connectors do have quite a bit. And it just makes for like a very ugly joint. And it's not only that, but when a lot of this insulation starts to peel back, then you're just starting to expose more and more of the wire, and then you have a greater potential for shorts inside of the connector, which is what you don't want. So what you can do, heat sink, what I would do is, and again, normally when I would do an audio connector or even a power connector like this, I would put the cable in, I would take the crimp tabs and I would crimp them down around the cable. I don't do it when I do these because the amount of heat starts to actually melt that outer insulation through these crimp tabs. So normally I would just leave it open. This end goes into the vise and you take heat sink, which has very difficult to open, but I like that because I know it's not going to slip off. And you just have to attach it right there. And what that's going to do, again, just increase the amount of mass and allow a little bit of additional heat to bleed out of the actual part and into the heat sink. And basically keep it away from the wire so you don't get too much heat that goes into the wire. Another good application for these is when you have a big difference in mass between what you're soldering. Like, for example, let's say you're putting a capacitor onto a tone knob like inside an electric guitar. The pot has a lot of mass and can soak up a lot of heat. The individual leg of a capacitor does not. So you could take this, clip it onto one of the legs of the capacitor that you're actually soldering down to the pot, and this will draw a little bit of heat away and it'll help to protect the capacitor. And it can be handy, especially if you have an underpowered iron where you have to actually hold that iron to the pot for quite a bit or quite a long time. Normal, longer than normal, that would be good for the part. These can really come in handy. And I really kind of like this part. I hadn't actually used it yet, and I just took it out of the package, but like I said, it is pretty firm. I feel like when I get it on there, it's not going to slip off, and plus it's rubberized because obviously if you're going to have something that's going to heat up, you don't want to be grabbing it. So I'm hoping this rubber insulation will protect my fingers from the heat a little bit when I go to take this on and off of a component. So handy little tip, especially if you have an underpowered iron, which hopefully you would fix this by getting a more powerful iron. And again, the tip temperature comes into play. Like normally if I'm doing larger stuff like this, I have the tip temperature up quite high, 850 degrees. When I'm doing something like this, I'm obviously dropping it down to maybe like 750, even like 700. But still, even if you don't have that kind of variable control iron, or you just forget about it, something like that, something like this can come in handy and just help you to produce better parts. Next up is the Neutrik NaC3 mm-1 Powercon coupler. So Powercon is a Neutrik's line of power couplers and cables as well. And if you're familiar with them at all, you'll identify the colors, blue being inputs and the gray side being outputs. Now, the obvious use for something like this is you have two short Powercon cables and you need to make a long one, so you just use this as a coupler. But one other interesting thing you can do is if you want to get Powercon onto your pedal board or into a rack or a laptop setup or something like that, normally Powercon, it's really meant to be like a panel mount or component mount solution, which means you see these on like say standard 19-inch rack panels, or you see them on the back of power amplifiers or something like that. Now, certain pedal boards, they do have, or certain manufacturers will actually make third-party panels that you can put onto a pedal board that you can also put a Powercon connector in. But if you have a flat board or something just doesn't allow that kind of functionality, you just don't have that kind of room, what you could do with something like this, and you can see I already put the dual lock on it, this doesn't come with it on there, is you could simply just dual lock one of these to the top of your flat board and then power in here, then power out on this side to probably an IEC type plug, which you would use to plug in the power supply. So it's a very durable little box. I think I only paid like $15 for this. It's not terribly expensive. And if you want to build your own Powercon cables, those are not terribly expensive either. The plugs are only a few dollars each, and you can use just about any kind of power cord you want with them. So for the scope of this video, at least, just talking about getting Powercon onto your flat board or some other place where you wouldn't have room for a panel. Quick, easy, cheap solution that actually works pretty well. Last but not least, we have a standard power connector from Leviton with instructions, which I always love in case you don't know how to wire one up. So first look, not too fancy. It's certainly very rugged, heavy duty kind of build, standard kind of like 2-screw with the strain relief. But the thing that makes this cool, if I open it up, is this center mechanism with the pins on it can be rotated to, I think, 8 different positions inside the connector, which means you can always get, if you have to plug this into an outlet, you can always get the cable to exit at a position that you want. Which again is very nice if you're really into cable control. You just need something clean. You don't want a cable to like come up and then loop back around, something like that. It's just a small thing, but it's depending on how you're actually need to use the power connector, it can be very handy. And to give you a good example of that, I'm going to just pull up a pedal board build I just did recently. I'm going to show you how I use this in conjunction with the Neutrik Powercon coupler. So what you see on here on the upper right hand side of the board right beside my patch bay is I have the Powercon connector just fastened down with dual lock. It's very sturdy. The input will come here. This is permanently attached. Again, blue for input, gray for output. And this cable goes down to this side of the board where the power supplies are. And that Powercon comes all the way down here to this Voodoo Labs, goes into the input. So that's this Powercon to IEC input. Now, so to have the 2 power supplies, I want to feed this one off the accessory output from this. And that's where the Leviton rotatable power plug really comes into play, because I can just have a nice short IEC to standard Edison power connector here, and because I can rotate it, I can definitely get the cable to come out this way in the direction of the power supply. It just keeps it really nice, neat. The less cable you have on your board, the better. So the conjunction of those two with the Powercon coupler and this can really just make the whole power section on your pedal board nice and neat. And that's all I have for this one. I hope you found it helpful, and if you did, I certainly would appreciate a like and a subscribe. Until next time, take care.